The Montgomery County Courthouse loomed over the quiet city streets, its towering marble pillars casting long, intimidating shadows in the dim glow of the streetlights. Inside, the grand halls stood eerily silent, absent of the usual chatter of lawyers, clerks, and defendants. The rhythmic ticking of a wall clock echoed through the vast courtroom, where stacks of legal documents lay scattered across the polished mahogany desk. At the center of it all sat Judge Maya Caldwell, flipping through case files with a steady, practiced hand. A woman of quiet strength and unwavering conviction, Maya had spent years proving herself in a system designed to keep her out. The weight of every decision, every ruling she had ever made, rested heavily on her shoulders. But she never flinched under pressure. Maya had earned her seat behind the bench, the very same one where generations of men before her had ruled with unchecked authority. But unlike them, she understood the power she wielded came with responsibility. She had spent her career ensuring that justice did not belong to the privileged few, but to those who needed it the most. And tonight, as she reviewed a particularly troubling corruption case involving police misconduct, she knew her work was far from over. The door to the courtroom swung open with force, the loud creak shattering the stillness. Heavy boots stomped against the marble floor, their pace slow but deliberate. Officer Daniel Hayes entered the room, his broad frame filling the doorway. His sharp blue eyes scanned the space, narrowing when they landed on the figure sitting comfortably behind the judge's desk. To him, the sight was wrong. A black woman in his courtroom, touching files that didn't belong to her, it didn't add up. Hayes had spent years operating with impunity, knowing his badge granted him the authority to act first and justify his actions later. He had built a career pushing boundaries, intimidating civilians, and ensuring people like Maya knew their place. And right now, she was sitting where she didn't belong. His fingers twitched near his holster, though he didn't draw his weapon. Not yet. Maya didn't react to his presence. She continued flipping through documents, her fingers turning the pages with deliberate patience. As if she hadn't even noticed him enter, Hayes hated being ignored. His jaw clenched as he took a few more steps forward, his boots echoing loudly against the floor. "Ma'am, step away from that desk right now." His voice was sharp, authoritative, the kind that had always commanded immediate compliance. But Maya didn't flinch. She simply turned another page, her eyes scanning the text as if his words meant nothing. This wasn't the response he was used to. Hayes was a man accustomed to obedience, to fear, to unquestioned control. He had spent his entire career ensuring that when he spoke, people listened. And yet, here she was, unmoved. His fingers flexed near his holster again. "I said, get up. This is a restricted area. You have no business sitting in that chair." Maya finally exhaled, slow and measured, before lifting her gaze to meet his. Her expression was unreadable, her posture completely at ease. There was no fear, no hesitation, just an unshakable presence that made his skin prickle. She set her pen down and tilted her head slightly. "And you are?" The words were smooth, controlled. Not a challenge, but an invitation for him to expose himself. Hayes let out a short, humorless laugh, his lips curling into something between amusement and disgust. "I'm the one who's about to throw you out of here if you don't move," he sneered, stepping closer. His shadow fell over her, but she didn't shrink under it. Maya raised an eyebrow, genuine curiosity flickering in her gaze. "Throw me out?" There was no humor in her tone, just quiet amusement, a tone that told him she already knew how this was going to end, and that only angered him more. His patience had run out. Hayes took another step forward, his body language shifting from authoritative to outright aggressive. "Don't act dumb with me," he snapped, his voice rising. "You don't belong here. I don't know how you got in, but I know damn well you aren't supposed to be sitting in that chair, messing with court documents like you have authority here. Now I'm telling you one last time, get up or I will remove you myself." Maya didn't blink. She saw it now, the insecurity beneath his anger. He wasn't challenging her because she was a security risk. He was challenging her because the sight of her behind that desk threatened everything he believed in. And that wasn't her problem. Hayes had had enough. Without another word, he lunged forward, his hand clamping around her arm with unnecessary force. He yanked her up from the chair, his grip bruising, his breath hot with unchecked fury. For a split second, Maya stumbled, not because she was weak, but because she hadn't expected him to be this foolish. She didn't resist. She didn't struggle. She simply let him make his final mistake. As he dragged her toward the door, his grip tightening, Hayes muttered under his breath, "You people always think you can walk in anywhere you want, take what you want, do whatever you want." The words were low but unmistakable, laced with every ounce of contempt he had bottled up inside. And then the courtroom door swung open. The courtroom clerk stood frozen in the doorway, her wide eyes bouncing between the officer's vice-like grip on Maya's arm and the judge herself, who still looked completely unshaken. The clerk's breath hitched, panic flashing across her face. "What the hell is going on in here?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the thick air. Hayes barely spared her a glance. He was too locked in his own authority to realize what was happening. He jerked his chin toward the judge's desk. "Caught her snooping through court files," he declared, his confidence unshaken. "She was trying to steal something or—" And that's when Maya, still calm as ever, reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. Hayes's grip tightened immediately. "Don't even think about it," he growled, his body tensing for a fight. But what she pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was something far more powerful. A judge's badge. The room went silent. The air shifted. And for the first time, Daniel Hayes realized he had just destroyed his career. For a moment, time stood still. The weight of Maya's judge's badge in her hand was enough to send a ripple of tension through the air. The golden emblem caught the dim courtroom lighting, its reflection flickering like a warning. But Daniel Hayes didn't move. His fingers were still wrapped tightly around Maya's arm, his grip firm, almost refusing to acknowledge the truth in front of him. He had spent his entire career exerting power over people like her. His authority had never been questioned, his actions never challenged. And now, the woman he had just manhandled had more power than him. He clenched his jaw, his arrogance refusing to die down so easily. "Nice trick," Hayes muttered, his smirk faltering but still there. "Anybody can flash a fake badge." Maya's expression didn't change. She simply let his words hang in the air, watching as his own ignorance drowned him. That's when Officer Scott Turner shifted uneasily behind him. Turner had been silent this entire time, watching the scene unfold with growing discomfort. He had always known Hayes had a problem with authority, especially when that authority didn't look like him. But tonight was different. This wasn't some random woman on the street. This was a judge, and Hayes was digging his own grave. Hayes?" Turner muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "Maybe we should—" "Shut it, Turner," Hayes snapped, cutting him off without breaking eye contact with Maya. "I know exactly what I'm doing." And in that moment, Maya knew he was going to make things worse for himself. Hayes's pride wouldn't let him back down, even as logic screamed at him to stop, even as his partner hesitated behind him. He doubled down. His fingers dug into Maya's arm again, a slight shake of frustration in his grip. "I don't care what badge you think you have," Hayes growled. "You're coming with me until we get this sorted out." Maya didn't resist, Not because she was afraid, because she wanted him to finish what he started. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the world to see how far men like him were willing to go to keep their power intact. But what Hayes didn't realize was that he had already lost, because now Turner was starting to panic. Hayes let go of her, Turner muttered again, his voice more urgent this time. This isn't right, man. I said shut up. Hayes's outburst rang through the courtroom like a gunshot. The sudden explosion of his voice made even Maya blink for a second. Turner flinched. For the first time, he looked truly afraid, not for himself, but for what was about to happen next. Maya exhaled, slow and steady, before speaking in the same calm, measured tone she had maintained the entire time. Officer Hayes? Her voice was quiet, but it commanded more authority than his screaming ever could. Hayes hesitated, his fingers still wrapped around her wrist. Maya tilted her head, her eyes studying him as if he were a case file she was about to slam a guilty verdict on. You do realize that you've just laid hands on a sitting judge, she continued, and that everything you've done in the past 5 minutes is a direct violation of multiple civil rights laws. A vein popped at Hayes's temple. His fingers finally loosened, just slightly, but his expression was still locked in disbelief. He still couldn't process the reality in front of him. Turner, however, had already stepped back, because now his training was screaming at him. His partner had just assaulted a judge, and there were witnesses. The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the moment. The courtroom door swung open again, and the clerk, who had seen everything, rushed inside. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, as she took in the scene before her. Maya standing firm, Hayes still gripping her wrist, Turner looking like he was about to be sick, and then the clerk's voice cracked through the silence. What the hell are you doing? Hayes jerked back like he had been slapped. His grip finally broke. Maya took a step away, smoothing the fabric of her sleeve where his fingers had crumpled it. Her expression didn't change, but now the room belonged to her. The clerk's eyes darted to Maya, panic clear in her voice. Judge Caldwell, are you okay? Do I need to call someone? Turner's heart skipped a beat at the words. Judge Caldwell. He had heard that name before, and now the full weight of what had just happened smashed into him like a freight train. His mouth went dry. Hayes was finished, and he knew it. Hayes looked at the badge in Maya's hand again. For the first time, his hands shook. He had been so blinded by his own power trip that he hadn't even bothered to look at her name. But now, as the realization dawned, his chest tightened with dread, because he had heard of her. Maya Caldwell, one of the most well-respected judges in the state, a woman who had prosecuted dirty cops before, a woman who had built a career ensuring men like him paid for their crimes, and he had just assaulted her in a courtroom in front of a witness. Turner inhaled sharply, his heart pounding. He turned to his partner, his voice barely above a whisper. We're screwed. Maya finally spoke again. Officer Hayes, she said, taking a slow step forward, I strongly suggest you start thinking about your next move very carefully. Her voice was like a gavel coming down on a guilty verdict. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Hayes realized that he was truly powerless. For a long, excruciating moment, nobody moved. The weight of the situation had finally settled into Officer Daniel Hayes's chest, pressing down like a boulder. His arrogance had carried him this far, but now, for the first time, he felt it slipping. And then, sirens. The distant sound of approaching squad cars pierced the thick silence, growing louder with every second. The clerk was still frozen in the doorway, her wide eyes bouncing between Maya and Hayes. Then, before anyone could react, the courtroom doors swung open again, this time with force. Chief Anthony Rollins stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding the room. A man known for his no-nonsense leadership, Rollins had spent decades trying to clean up the department's reputation, only for officers like Hayes to make his job impossible. He took one look at the scene in front of him, Maya standing tall, Hayes still caught between confusion and panic, Turner looking like he wanted to disappear, and let out a slow, steady breath. What the hell's going on here? His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Turner inhaled sharply but didn't answer. Hayes? He opened his mouth, ready to talk his way out of it, but before he could even form an excuse, Maya moved first. She reached down, picked up her phone from the judge's bench, and pressed play. The sound filled the room instantly. You think that matters? Out here, I decide what's legitimate. You people always think you can walk in anywhere you want, take what you want, do whatever you want. I said shut up. Hayes froze. Turner flinched at hearing it played back, as if experiencing it all over again. But Chief Rollins? His face hardened, his jaw clenched, his fingers curling into a tight fist at his side. The disgust in his expression was immediate. Hayes could feel the entire weight of the room turn against him, and for the first time in his career, his badge wouldn't save him. Still, he tried. That's not what it sounds like, Hayes started, forcing a chuckle that no one returned. She was acting suspicious. How was I supposed to know she was really a judge? Rollins' eyes narrowed sharply. Acting suspicious? His voice was dangerously low now, the way a storm builds before it strikes. Hayes swallowed hard. Come on, Chief, you know how this looks. She was enough. The single word slammed into Hayes like a bullet. Rollins wasn't asking for an explanation. He was done listening. He turned to Maya, his voice carrying an unmistakable weight of respect. Your Honor, he said, his tone calm but firm, are you pressing charges? Maya didn't blink. Absolutely. And with that, Hayes's fate was sealed. Rollins gave a single nod, his face unreadable. Officer Hayes, you are hereby placed under immediate investigation for abuse of power, assault, and unlawful detainment of a sitting judge. This isn't the first time he's done this. Rollins looked up sharply. Go on. Turner exhaled, his pulse pounding. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have said something. His chest rose and fell, guilt flickering in his eyes. There are more victims. Maya didn't look surprised. But Rollins? He turned to his officers. I want everything on Hayes. Every report, every complaint. If anything was covered up, I want to know. Turner nodded, determined. I'll help. And just like that, the veil of silence that had protected men like Hayes for years had been torn down. The news broke within hours. Officer arrested for assaulting judge in shocking incident. Racist cop exposed in court. Justice finally served. Major networks picked up the footage. Maya's calm voice. Hayes's threats. The moment he was dragged away in cuffs. Social media erupted. People demanded deeper investigations. Other victims came forward. And just like that, a corrupt system that had protected men like Hayes for years was finally crumbling. But Maya, she wasn't celebrating yet, because she knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The courtroom was packed. The same halls where Officer Daniel Hayes once roamed freely as an untouchable figure of authority were now the site of his reckoning. The judge's bench, this time occupied by a different judge, loomed over him like a silent reminder that his power was gone. But the real weight? It came from the mountains of evidence stacked against him. The prosecution wasted no time. They played the recording. You think that matters? Out here, I decide what's legitimate. I said shut up. The jury listened in dead silence as Hayes's own words condemned him. And it didn't stop there. More victims came forward. More recordings surfaced. More witnesses testified about how Hayes had abused his power for years, targeting people of color, fabricating charges, intimidating those who dared to challenge him. The defense tried to spin it, painting Hayes as a dedicated officer who made a mistake. But when Officer Scott Turner took the stand, any last hope Hayes had evaporated. Turner sat stiffly, his guilt weighing on him. He admitted he had been silent for too long, that he had witnessed Hayes use excessive force, forge reports, intimidate civilians, and had never spoken up out of fear. But now he was finally telling the truth, and that truth was damning. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all charges. Hayes's face turned pale as the judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison for abuse of power, assault, and civil rights violations. The same system that had protected him for years had finally turned against him. Justice had been served. Hayes's conviction was just the beginning. Turner's testimony opened the floodgates. Internal Affairs dug into police records and found a pattern of cover-ups, missing complaints, and fabricated reports. Over a dozen officers were placed under investigation. Several high-ranking officials resigned before they could be indicted, and for the first time, the entire department was being held accountable. The truth was out in the open, and now it couldn't be ignored. The public demanded change. For years, people had spoken out against police corruption, against discrimination, against abuses of power. And now, because of Maya's case, lawmakers couldn't look the other way anymore. A federal oversight committee was created to investigate police misconduct cases without interference from local departments. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, with severe consequences for tampering with footage. New legislation criminalized racial profiling, making it easier to hold officers legally accountable for bias-driven policing. Independent prosecutors were assigned to all cases of officer-involved violence, eliminating conflicts of interest. The system was finally changing, not because of politicians, not because of police leadership, but because people had refused to be silent. And leading that charge, Judge Maya Caldwell. Maya never wanted the spotlight, but after the case, her name was everywhere. People saw her not just as a judge, but as a fighter, an advocate, a leader. She was invited to speak on national television, where she called for more police accountability and deeper legal reforms. Protesters held up signs with her name. Social media erupted with messages of support. To the world, she was proof that change was possible, that one voice could challenge an entire system and win. But to Maya, this wasn't a victory lap. This was just the beginning. Because as long as corruption existed, the fight wasn't over. The city skyline stretched before Judge Maya Caldwell, glowing softly under the night sky. From the window of her office, she watched the distant streets where life moved forward, unaffected by the battle she had just fought. The courthouse was quiet now, the echoes of that fateful night long gone, but the weight of it all still lingered. Officer Daniel Hayes was behind bars. His department had been exposed for its corruption. New laws had been passed, bringing real accountability to a system that had long protected men like him. But Maya knew better than to call this justice. Justice wasn't one case. Justice wasn't one conviction. Justice wasn't a single corrupt cop being thrown in prison. Because for every Hayes who was caught, there were dozens more still out there, still patrolling the streets, still believing they were untouchable. And as long as they existed, her fight wasn't over. Maya sighed, running a hand over her desk, a desk where she had signed rulings that changed lives, where she had delivered verdicts meant to uphold justice. And yet some days she wondered, would real justice ever be possible? Would there ever come a time when people didn't have to fight just to be treated fairly? Would there ever be a world where power didn't corrupt? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing. This case, Her case had proven something important, that one voice could make a difference, that one act of defiance could tear down years of silence, and that even in a broken system, change was still possible. She had seen it firsthand, and she wasn't about to stop now. Her phone buzzed beside her, a new case, another officer under investigation, another battle to fight. Maya exhaled slowly and grabbed her coat, preparing to step back into the storm, because corruption didn't sleep, and neither did she. Do you think real justice can ever be achieved? Comment below. Your voice matters.